of different. So I do contract 3D work on the side. My full time job is as a game art professor at Becker College. Mostly I do work over the summers and also here and there. Again, primarily games. I had a great time working with Hit Point last summer and then a little bit here and there. Since then, on I think 2 or 3 different projects. Also worked on, I was at Turbine for a couple of years full time. I think I saw Todd DeMille there. So yeah, I worked on a few of their big games, Lord of the Rings Online, Dungeons and Dragons Online, and the ill-fated Infinite Crisis. I worked on a handful of other indie games and continue to do so. As far as tools go, is that enough of an introduction for my backstory, Pat, or
I think that was good,
anything
but you're
else?
welcome to
Okay.
keep going. We've got
We
9 minutes
got
to
to,
kill before.
oh, right. We got 10 minutes before I'm actually supposed to start the actual Blender part.
Yeah.
What else can I say? Okay, maybe it's just time for me to talk more about myself, which I rarely do.
Well, you can definitely talk more about yourself. You can incorporate that into your presentation as well. I
Yeah.
also just wanted to give everybody else an opportunity if they have any
Oh,
announcements to make. This is kind of like the welcome schmoozing as best we can schmooze through chat, and me communicating that well. Todd says hi. He's watching as well from home and
yep. Thank you.
or wherever he may be, and says hello. So yeah, I guess I'll go to channel first. There's a small handful of you guys here. Anybody have any announcements they'd like to make, or just give me a funny emoji, anything? I just want to make sure you guys can hear. And there's a little delay, so I'm guessing that's why nobody's speaking up. Say hi. We are still live, right?
Hope so.
Yeah. Hey, we got a couple hearts. Okay, so Todd is
Oh,
here.
good.
Yeah. Um, Todd, are you looking for any uh, looking to hire at the moment at all for your projects? Just saying. I don't know if you're for a back-end engineer or 3D support. Anything to announce there? I know the answer to this.
You do know the answer to it.
Okay. Well, I think I can't remember what the positions are, but hopefully Todd will poke it in the chat. Check out Hit Point Studios /careers. So yeah, if you are looking for work right now, and you're in the, I think it's the 3D side and some front end and back end engineers as well, Hit Point is hiring. So I should have announced that since I also work at the company, but I'm trying to interact here.
And I want to add, I had a wonderful time working with Hit Point.
Woohoo!
Yep.
So thanks. We got Ezra's recommendation. Um, Proletariat in Boston sounds like they are hiring a ton right now, so that is another good place to check. Um, so yeah, check them out as well. Yep, Todd and Jamal just realized they know each other, and they're on here.
Right. They work together at Turbine.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
All right, cool.
Wait, did you hear the proletariat info from Jamal?
Yeah, he just posted in chat.
Oh, in the because I'm not seeing any of that on my stream chat.
Oh,
That's weird.
hmm.
The last thing I see is "Hey Todd" from me.
Oh.
Okay.
So Elliot wanted me to remind everybody again about the game dev slacks, and so we do have Mass Game Devs, which is our PVGD Slack, or Pioneer Valley Game Developers Slack, and it incorporates a good amount of people from other places as well, but more local to our area. That's a great place to meet our community as well, if anyone wants to connect there. Um, and then, of course, there's the Boston Game Devs Slack, which is also a great one. And then, I almost called you Vermont. Elliot, feel free to share any of the your list of Slacks. Um, let's see. I don't know. There's so much going on in the world right now that we could fill in with time. There was some great protests in Western Mass this week. Um, I imagine a lot of people are following along. Hopefully, you're getting out and staying safe and sending some positive messages out. Um, Yeah, I guess not a whole lot to that other than good on you for being involved if you are. If not, there's a few of us that have been involved and happy to share some information on how to be involved and to get signed up with your local protests and making a difference for social injustice in this world. Um, let's see. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that we can really chat on. Ezra, do you want to give a quick intro to what you'll be talking about today?
Of course. Yeah. So I'll be doing a demo using Blender. I've been using Blender for some number of years now, but particularly seriously in the last few years. What I'll be showing today, I wanted to test Blender and see if I could create a character completely from end to end, a real-time game-ready character. And by that, I mean sculpting, retopology, UVs, other modeling stuff, texture painting, rigging, and I don't know if I've missed anything else. So all that stuff just in Blender. I literally didn't do a single thing outside of Blender. And so all I'm going to be doing today is don't have time, obviously, to show every last step and every last thing I did. Rather, I'm just going to sort of pick and choose a few tools, techniques, things that I've discovered, things that I did that just sort of how I did certain parts, basically. And then after that, if anybody has any questions about any other parts, how I might have done them, or how you might, any recommendations or suggestions you're looking for regarding Blender, let me know.
Cool.
Now, I should say that I don't necessarily recommend that you do everything like I did from end to end in Blender. I just, again, wanted to sort of test its capabilities. I already knew that its capabilities were great for things like modeling, UVs, but texturing in particular was something I hadn't ever done much of in Blender. And so, yeah, hopefully that's clear about what I'm going to be demoing today.
Cool. I guess I just want to ask, I don't really know a lot about the 3D art side. It's one of my weaknesses in game dev.
Yep,
But I do know, Blender has been kind of this, um, I don't know. I guess from what I've heard is, not the industry standard or hasn't been. However, in the last couple of years, it has definitely, it has become more of an industry standard,
yep,
especially in games. But can you just describe your introduction to Blender and why you're now mainly using Blender? Just how
sure.
you got into it in the first place. And
Yeah, good question. So I have experience with just about every 3D package imaginable over the years. I both used and taught an awful lot of different packages. The one that I spent the longest amount of time on with was Maya. And Maya back in the day did not have good, specifically UV unwrapping tools. And so this is getting kind of in the weeds right away, but I used a little program, maybe some of you've heard of, called Roadkill, which basically took Blender's UV tools and just made it a little standalone thing. That was basically my gateway drug. I started using Blender, I don't know how many years ago, 7, 8 years ago, just for its UV tools, but then really kind of got serious about it when I started teaching again after leaving Turbine and going to Becker College. I started also doing contract work, and I figured this is a great time for me to start using some open source tools, in particular Blender. So that's what kind of was prompted me to stop using Maya for my personal work and commercial work. I still teach Maya, I should add, but it really kind of picked up a lot of steam in the past year specifically. Last summer, Blender released version 2.80, and it had a revamped user interface, some other stuff. But in particular, I think what really excited people, well, I should add a couple of things that excited people. One that really excited people is its real-time render called Eevee. I see a question. Have I used Mudbox? Yes, I've used Mudbox before. Not a ton. I'm more of a ZBrush user, and I can talk about that when I tackle a little bit of the sculpting features in Blender. So as I was saying, I where was I with the whole Blender thing? Oh yeah, this was the last year. So Eevee is this real-time render, which is amazing. It's probably the best real-time render within a 3D authoring package. And it's just great to be able to set up materials and textures and stuff in Blender and have a pretty good idea of what they're going to look like, say, in a game engine. Okay. So I'm not sure, maybe somebody else can correct me that there is something else out there that's superior as far as a sort of authoring application real-time render, but that's my understanding. The other reason I think why Blender has really kind of picked up steam in the last year is basically I think people are getting more and more disillusioned with Autodesk. So
I've heard some great.
I should also mention that Blender, I don't want to be very US centric because Blender really, I think, has been much more popular in other countries for longer. It's kind of more, and there's all this, it's a little facetious. I called this talk, What's All the Fuss About with Blender? And probably there are thousands and thousands of Blender users around the world. They're going to be like, you're just seeing it now that Blender is great. I mean, again, I've been using Blender for longer than the past year, and so I've known it's great for a while. But really, you're starting to see, like, if I look on my Twitter feed at all these game artists, pretty prominent game artists that I follow, it seems like one after the other are just picking up Blender in the last 6 months or so. They're for various reasons, and yeah, I see somebody else. Oh boy, I see some nasty comments about Autodesk. I just want to add. So I've never been a commercial user of Autodesk. Again, my primary job, my full-time job is an educator. So my college just has its own licenses. So thankfully, I don't have to deal with them in that area. I don't want to crap on Maya as an actual tool. I used it since version 1, and I still like it. I just have found that, again, if I'm trying to stay legitimate, which I am, why not just use a tool, Blender, which does everything I need it to do? That basically it just replaces Maya for my needs. I haven't had the need to use Maya for a couple of years now for any kind of commercial work in games. So that's kind of my take on that whole thing.
Sweet.
Okay.
Great answer.
All right.
It is 7:02, so it might be a
Yep.
great transition into the presentation. So
Very good.
I'm going to turn myself off and let you share your screen and enjoy. Be watching for
All
the
right.
headlines.
So hopefully people can see this great. Yep, I can see it on Twitch. All right. So I, again, just in the last couple of months or so, sort of here and there, pecked away at building this character. It's again, the intent was to use many of the things I had already known, modeling, sculpting, retopology, and so on. The big new thing for me, a little bit rigging. I'm not really much of a rigger myself, but I'll be showing how I rig the character in Blender. But also, as I said, the texture painting, and I'll talk a little bit about that today. So let's just see if there we go. So here we've got. You'll see the finished results later on. I mean, you can more or less see it right here. I just want to give props to, I forget her name, but I could post it later on. I just found a woman in Russia who made a concept for this goblin postman, Marina Tetra Orb or something like that. You can, if you just look me up on ArtStation, you can find basically her information. And I just asked her for permission. Can I just make this in 3D for just a personal project? And she said, that's great. Talking about the sort of hopeful process of creating a character, if you're starting to get into any kind of reasonably modern character art workflow, you're probably going to want to sculpt a character. And I'll get to the sculpting shortly, but I first off wanted to talk about just one particular modeling tool that I didn't find easy to do, let's just say, in Maya, or quite as elegantly. I mean, I can do it in Maya, but basically, Blender has these Bezier curves. Again, nothing fancy with Beziers. They're just like in other programs like Adobe Illustrator, but you can use them to create 3D geometry. So I'm going to switch over to Blender now and go ahead and open up. One moment, please. Okay. Oh, well, I guess I can just do it right here. Okay, so if I want to mention actually too, I have done a little bit of customization in Blender, and I will talk about here and there uh, some add-ons that I use for Blender. Blender is kind of like I believe I can't remember, maybe 3D Studio also has a lot of plugins. Add-ons are just like plugins. There are many add-ons that are actually right with Blender. In other words, if you download Blender, and just a reminder, and if anybody doesn't know about Blender, if I step back for a second, it's a free open source software. So if you just go to blender.org and download the latest version, you'll actually see, for instance, I'm just opening up the preferences here in Blender. If you go to add-ons, there are all sorts of extra add-ons, and you can see some of them are already checked off, but many are not checked off. And there's actually some pretty cool ones built right in there, which you can just enable by just checking them off. You can also download free add-ons, and I have a handful of those that really add some nice functionality. And you can also buy some add-ons, and those tend to be the more premium sort of ones. And I'll show one or two or a few add-ons that do different things that have really helped my workflow in creating game art characters. So all that said, I also just wanted to quickly mention you will see some non-standard stuff as I'm working here in Blender. So one thing, for instance, I have I purchased this add-on called Pie Menu Editor. For anybody who's familiar with Maya, they're just like marking menus. And I'm not sure if Maya was the originator of that kind of user interface thing, but basically Pie Menu Editor allows you to create custom marking menus. I just have always liked those in Maya, and I just like to be able to, so I've created a few custom marking menus, one for mesh editing, one for object level editing, another one for UV editing, things like that. All right, so I was mentioning, if I go back to this graphic, I highlighted, you can see over here, these sort of light orange kinds of parts, and I made all of those using Bezier curves. So if you just do a Shift-A, add, and then go to Curve Bezier, you'll see it just creates this little default curve. Now, if you go into edit mode, you'll see you've got these two different points, just like a standard Bezier. I'm just going to go to my top view. And by the way, there are also some marking menus that are just built into Blender by default. If I hit the tilde key, for instance, you'll see it just brings up the little view thing. So I can say, go to left, top, whatever. And so I can, for instance, rotate these things, straighten this out, and then just go back to object mode. And so you can see now I just have a straight Bezier. Now, these Bezier curves, if you go over here to the sort of settings or properties panels on the bottom right here, you'll see a little dedicated panel for the Beziers. And you'll notice there's within there a section for geometry. And there's some cool things you can do with this Bezier that start adding extra dimensionality to it. So for instance, if I go to bevel, you'll notice it's an oddly named category. It's really kind of a thickness or sort of a loft or whatever you want to call it. So I put this to say 0.2, you can see it's basically just creating some kind of a tube or geometry based off of the Bezier. Now, I'm going to actually make that a little bit smaller. You can change some other settings. For instance, if I go down in resolution, hopefully you can make out it's just going to decrease the number of axis subdivisions in this tube. But this is still actually an editable Bezier. So I can, for instance, start pulling these things around, and you can see it's pretty nice for creating things like tubes, cables, stuff like that. I can right-click and subdivide to add in extra points, and I'm just using G to grab to just to move these points around. You can also R to rotate these things around, S to scale these things in or out. And so you can see that's one thing you can do with these things. Now, this is a preview. It's not actual editable geometry. You have to convert it to editable geometry if you want to use it for, say, a game character or game asset. The way you can do that, I have my Blender set up so that the space bar does a search. And the thing I'm looking for is called a convert. And you'll see object, convert to, and I can convert this mesh to a mesh. Now, if I go back into edit mode, you can see it's polygons. Okay, so quite easy. Now, I didn't use that specific functionality for this character. Rather, I used this other thing over here, which is extrude. Now, if I say put this to like 0.2, you'll notice this is a little different. Now, instead of it sort of being like a tube, it's just sort of giving it a planar thickness to it. Okay, and again, this is still an editable mesh. I can also say rotate this whole thing. There we go. And let me also just straighten this out. And so if I jump back over here to this image, I used this little technique I'm about to show you for all of these hair pieces, these little hair cards. And you may notice, and actually it might be helpful if I just jump to the end so you can see the final version. They all taper. They all have this sort of, they sort of a little bit wider at the top, much wider in the middle, and they taper to a point. So let me just jump back there. And so Blender has this funny way of dealing with this, which is basically you create another Bezier curve. Let me just move that over to the side. And this is like a profile. And basically, it's the left side is the top of this, the right side at the bottom. So I'm going to go back to this thing. I'm going to say I want there to be a thing called a taper object. There we go. And you can see it's already starting to do this kind of crazy tapering. Now, when I go into this thing and start editing this one, if I start grabbing this and moving it, say, backwards and forwards along the z-axis, it's one of these weird things that you just sort of have to start get into the mindset of it. Then you can start to use it to create these kinds of tapers. Okay, so let's see here. Was this the top or the bottom? Oh, that's the top. So there's the bottom. So I'll just move it back on the y-axis, and then you can see that'll allow me to taper it. Oops, RZ. There we go. And then I can get a sort of tapered bottom right there. Okay, and then hopefully you can see the result would be something like this. And so that's how I created all those little hair pieces. All right. I use that also, you can see, for these straps. And sometimes what I would do is go back to this modifier stack over here. So let me just, again, convert this to geometry. And then Blender has these wonderful modifiers, which allow you to do all kinds of stuff. And I'll show a few more of those shortly. But I'm going to go ahead and add in one called a solidify. And solidify basically will take this planar object. I can increase this thickness. Maybe I'll just go ahead and apply this just so you can see the result. And you can see it's given me some thickness to this thing. Now, I didn't do that for the hair cards. I did do that, though, for these straps on the sort of satchel, the mailbag. Okay. All right. So that's what I wanted to show for a little bit of modeling. Now I wanted to talk a little bit about sculpting. So I have a tendency when I'm doing characters to build, I guess it's basically a mannequin of the whole character in the classic either A or T pose. I think I did the A pose for this one without all the clothes and gear and so on. And so the way I do that is I start with some kind of an armature. Now, there are some tools, techniques that are kind of brought over or borrowed from, let's just say, ZBrush. Now, ZBrush, I want to say that is really a superior sculpting program, flat out. As far as modeling is concerned, I think Blender is, in my opinion, the cream of the crop. There may be other programs that are comparable to it as far as pure polygonal modeling. But when you start talking about something like sculpting, right now, no contest. ZBrush is the best sculpting program out there, in my opinion, and probably most other people's opinions. Now, that being said, Blender is capable. I don't know whether it's second best as a sculpting. It's not like there's tons of sculpting programs out there, but it's very good. And especially if you don't need to do extremely fine, super realistic sculpts, Blender is really suitable for the task as far as I'm concerned. So for instance, this character is not a super realistic character clearly. So the sculpting in Blender was just fine for this task. So what I like to do when I'm creating a character is I'm going to create a new mesh. It actually can be anything. I'm going to create a cube though. And I'm going to go into edit mode. And I'm going to do an Alt M. This is a merge, which basically is going to merge the verts. Now I have all my verts selected, so I'm going to go to F center. It's a little hard to see, but I literally just have a single vert. That is all I've got. And I started sculpting the entire character out of this single vertex, okay? And the way I did that is I started piling on a few of these modifiers. I'm going to go over here to add modifier. I'm going to start with something called a skin modifier. You'll notice, give it a second, there we go. It brought back a cube. This is just going to, again, you'll see as these things start to pile on how this all works. Next, just expand that a little bit. I'm going to add in another modifier called a subdivision surface. You may be familiar with this. It's called smoothing in smooth in Maya. And you'll notice it quadruples the number of faces, and it also starts to collapse and round out this thing. Now, if I want, I could also increase the number of subdivisions to make it look a little more rounded. If I don't want to see the faceted look over here, I can also jump over here to the skin modifier and just turn on smooth shading. And what I can do with this thing is if I go back into edit mode, there still is just a single vert right over there. But what I can do is start extruding that vert. And you'll notice when I start extruding this vertex, it starts to create these things. Now let me turn on X-ray so you can see this a little bit better. Hopefully you can all see there these verts with the edges in between them. And with these additional two modifiers, the skin and then the subdivision, it's going to create the whole geometry that goes with it. So what's great about this, and this is very similar to Z-spheres in ZBrush, almost identical. I just find them, I actually like these better than Z-spheres in ZBrush because you can do some nice stuff. Like it's very easy, for instance, to Control A to scale these things up and down. And so you can see how I can create this kind of shape very quickly rather than trying to model that by hand. All right, so let me just bring that back again. So I'm going to go ahead and just go back to edit mode and delete these vertices. And the additional thing that I do with the character is, many characters are more or less symmetrical. So I'm going to make my life a little easier by adding in another modifier called a mirror modifier. There we go. And just want to confirm, Pat, is everything still going fine?
It seems to be.
Okay, great.
Very little chatter, but I see you on the feed, so
that's all I wanted to hear. That's all I wanted to hear. So this mirror modifier, let me just collapse these so you can see this little modifier stack. And again, modifiers is something which, for anybody who's used 3D Studio Max, it's had modifiers from the get-go. For this to work, though, I need to reorder these so that I'm going to just move my mirror modifier up to the top of the stack. And so I'm going to go over here to the edit mode again. And now you'll notice if I extrude this, it seems like I want it to work. So I'm going to go ahead and just delete this whole thing and just start from scratch. And just add in a new plane, edit mode, Alt M. Let me just try that one more time. I'm going to do these in order now. I'm going to create the mirror modifier. I'm going to add in the skin modifier. There we go. And I'll just make that smooth. And then finally, I'll add in the subdivision surface modifier. And hopefully this time it will work. I'll extrude this. There we go. Yeah, I just, something funny with the order of the way I did things. So now you can see that mirror modifier is allowing me to do these two things on the sides here. And a little tip with the mirror modifier, you probably want to turn on this thing called bisect X. That'll just get rid of any overlapping geometry right along the center there. So what I can do with this is I can just create a whole character. And basically it's like an armature. It's really, at this stage, it's just meant to be a very quick way of blocking out the entire character as far as the sort of proportions, the main locations for things like joints and the height of the head and so on. The shape is not going to be anywhere near to the correct shape or proportions. You're going to get into that more with the refinement of that in the sculpting phase. This is really just the sort of prepping of a base mesh for your sculpt. So I can just keep on extruding these things down. I can move this over here. I can add in extra points by subdividing. I can go to different views and grab that and move this a little bit forward, establish things like the waist, the shoulders and so on, the arms. But I'm not going to go to this whole thing. I'm basically, that's how I started this goblin character. I basically just did a whole extrusion of all this stuff, similar to before with the those little Bezier curve objects that I was showing you. This is just a preview. If I want real editable geometry, then I would once again have to go into convert to and convert it again to a mesh object. And now you'll notice it's just got geometry, editable polygons, okay? So that's that stage. Now, once I finish up with all that, then I convert it to a mesh. You can see I did that. And then I move over to the sculpting phase. So Blender has some preset sort of user interface settings. And you can see if you just click on that, I just switch over to my sculpting. There we go. And one thing I really like to use, and I should mention that, again, one area that Blender has fallen short as far as sculpting goes in relation to ZBrush is that it hasn't had good multi-resolution. ZBrush is really great for that. Now, my understanding is this very latest version of Blender that was just released, 2.83, has greatly improved multi-resolution. I haven't tried it out yet, but I'm eager to try it out. Well, basically, so this Goblin Postman character I just did entirely using this thing called Dyntopo. Now, Dyntopo, you'll notice there's a little checkbox up here. I'm going to go ahead and turn on my wireframe so you can see what's going on here. Let me just make sure under the, let's see, where is it? Symmetry. I want to make sure that my X mirror is also turned on over here in the sculpting mode. I can also turn on Dyntopo here. What Dyntopo is Blender's dynamic topology, similar to Dynamesh and ZBrush. 3D Coat has its own version of this. Maybe Mudbox. I'm not sure if Mudbox also has a dynamic topology option at this point. I haven't used Mudbox much lately. But you'll notice if I turn on Dyntopo, and then let's just see here. Maybe I'll try a... oh, there we go. You can see it just updated. It triangulates the whole thing. I'm going to increase my brush size. And let's just try out, say, this tool. So you'll notice now when I start to push and pull this stuff around, what it's doing is it's automatically and dynamically adding in extra geometry as needed. So that's what I was talking about when I was sort of mentioning the laying out of this initial form, the initial forms using the skin modifier and all that business. You really just need it for the basic proportions. Then you can really start to flesh this out, get the musculature in, if you need a narrower waist. I see, is this thing on? I'm not quite sure what that means, but hopefully I'm on still. Excellent, Todd. Thank you. So basically, this is entirely how I sculpted this entire character to begin with. You can also change the sort of mode of Dyntopo over here. So, for instance, I can switch over to refine method to something like, to this from relative detail to say brush detail. And the way this works is when I go smaller with my brush size, see how the poly count gets smaller too. So there's a few different ways I can get that, and this would allow me then to get more detailed, for finer areas of detail like the face and so on. Okay. So all that said, let's just jump over and take a look at the final result of my fully sculpted sort of goblin mannequins. Just open that up. It's me. Well, I just find it. I'm just working on my second monitor over here. Okay. There we go. So you can see, and again, if you want to just take a look quickly at the wireframe, I'll just turn that on, and you can see quite a few polygons in areas that needed it, maybe a few too many in the, in the brows and so on, but you can see I got pretty detailed in areas like for the hands and so on, quite a few polygons. Feet, you can see, are pretty dense. Okay. So let me just turn off that wireframe. So the next phase, once you have a sculpt like this, is to create a game-ready mesh. That's the process known as retopology, or retopo for short. Retopo is basically the process of creating a new mesh, a brand new piece of geometry that looks basically exactly the same as this sculpted mesh. In specific, it's the same silhouette. The forms, the large forms, the primary forms, the secondary forms, some of the larger tertiary forms are all going to be captured when I create this new mesh. But then if you want the really fine details, if you have any sort of sculpted texture detail, a surface detail, that can be baked. And if there's time, I will also show the baking process. So let's see, I can see time is a wasting. So let me just quickly talk about retopology in Blender. Now you can do retopology in Blender out of the box. Basically, it's a little bit convoluted. There is a great YouTube video where all the steps and settings are laid out by flip normals. And basically, if you just do a YouTube search, flip normals, retopology Blender, you're going to find a great, basically, they just go step by step. But basically, what you would need to do is to create a new plane, for instance. Let's scale that thing way down. Top view, I'm going to grab that, move it over here. And I'm not going to go through this whole step process because that'll be painful for people to watch. But basically, once I create this as a starting point, I need to, once again, start resorting to some modifiers. So I'm going to go ahead and add in a thing called a shrink wrap modifier. The target will be the high poly. And I don't know if you can make out that this is starting to stick to the surface. If I want, I can make sure that this thing is visible in front all the time, for instance. And then basically, if I want, I can just go over here. Just go back to modifiers. There we go. So now if I want, I can just go here and just say use basic modeling tools and start, say, extruding. There is a little nice feature for turning on merging somewhere. I think it is already on. Maybe not. Anyway, so pretty tedious. Needless to say, I don't like doing my my retopology this way. I use an add-on for this. It's called Retopo Flow. Retopo Flow is I don't know if it's the most expensive add-on out there for Blender. For someone like me who does a lot of retopology, it's such a big time saver that it was worth the money. And the way it works is you select your target mesh. You don't have to do all kinds of setup. In addition, it has some tools that are not available otherwise. So I'm just going to create this new target. This is, go ahead.
Oh, Ezra.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to wait on questions or not, but
Yeah, sure.
one from Kreth said, how many polys in a single shell could you get away with before using the shrink wrap function?
In a single shell. What is a shell exactly? Do you mean a single mesh?
He says you used it with one poly.
With one poly. Well, let me just see. How many polys in a single shell? You do an entire mesh. I'm going to try and infer what you're asking. Basically, I was just starting with a single polygon, but then I would literally need to start extruding and building out the entire surface on the entire character, polygon by polygon. I mean, I could extrude multiple edges at once. But yes, I could do the entire mesh with that technique. Yep. But what I'm about to show you is a faster way, this Retopo flow. close this up. Now I should mention this is in beta. It is definitely slow at the moment. I hope that the thing will start to get extra performance increase over here. So let me just see here. I want to turn on symmetry if I can. There we go. I want to turn on X symmetry. And I'll know that it's on in a second because I should see a line that appears. There we go. So basically you'll see this, in addition to not having to do all that setup with like setting up a shrink wrap modifier, creating geometry, it also has dedicated tools that really speed up the process. Again, I don't have time to show a lot about this tool, about Retopo Flow, but basically you can do things like this. For instance, contours is great for doing things like arms and legs. I can hold down Control, and all these tools are based off of the control, and you can see it creates this little loop. You can see the symmetry over there. And this is gonna, immediately it'll tell you how many polygons around it's gonna be. So I can say, decrease this with the minus key. Maybe I'll do like a dozen all the way around. And then I can start drawing more of these things. And you can see pretty quick retopology of the entire arm, okay? And what's also great about this thing, just deselect. Let's see if I've got that right.
You're making Chris drool.
Drool, yeah. That you can insert in extra loops. There's a loops tool right there. If I just again hold down Control, you can insert in extra loops at any time. And what's great too about this, and I'm trying to remember, actually, I think I can do it now. When I create one of these loops, there are some hotkeys. Again, this is a new version, so it's not working right now. Oh, I probably have to go back to contours for this to work. There we go. Let's try it out again now. That's not working. That's not working. Never mind. Okay, so let me just show you a couple other tools that are quite nice. So polystrips. This is for more complex areas of topology. So for instance, let's talk about the chest over here. What I can do, for instance, is select, does that allow me? There we go. And then what I can do is hold down Control and say, drag right down there. And you can see, looks like it didn't attach it, but I could always attach it later on. You can see how it created this whole strip of polygons right there. And I can, again, add in extra ones on the fly, plus or minus, to increase or decrease those. Now, actually, I don't like how large that is, so I'm going to just first decrease my brush size a little bit to make a narrower strip. And again, draw something like that. There we go. That looks a little bit better. Then I can say, grab this thing, tuck it right into the middle there. Then I can, I believe, see if this works now. I can say drag up to here. Now you can see I've just created another little strip right there. Okay. And so on. So this is really just a great way. I haven't seen it quite as elegantly done in any other program because this is a very common way of thinking about topology, which is to think about establishing these key face loops that really establish the overall flow of your character. And what's also great about this too, let me just deselect this, is you can also really quickly fill in these spaces. You just have to know the correct sort of number of faces. Actually, I'm going to just do it in a separate little strip right over here, just so you can see what I'm talking about. Let me just do it again. I'm going to create a little strip right there, there, and I'll do that one more time so I don't have 5. Actually, I can just use my minus key there and there. Great. So you can see I've got that space in the middle. I can use this thing called the patches tool to just fill that whole space in afterwards. So now if I hold down there, there, and then hit that, enter, I just fill that in automatically. Really nice. So again, you can see what you do have to do is you have to have the exact right number of edges matching up on the parallel sides, basically, to get that to fill in. Yeah, so that's some really fast and nice stuff. In addition, you can do strokes, draw stuff like this. You can relax stuff, you can tweak stuff. That's all quite nice. So ultimately, if you're planning to do any retopology in Blender, I haven't seen another option that's as good as this personally. Okay, unwrap tools. Let's see. I think we are. I just saw that request, so that's actually the next thing I was about to show. So let's just get out of here. Let's just go ahead and open up. Actually, what I'm gonna do here is just create a new scene. And I'll talk just a little bit at some basics about UVs in Blender. I'm gonna just add in the old monkey. And actually, this seems like a great time for me to quickly mention, Blender for games. You may find a lot of tutorials and information about using Blender for general 3D, but as those of us who have, those of you are who are watching this are aware, there are some particular concerns when you're creating models that need to go into a game engine. One thing in particular is what I think Max calls smoothing groups. Maya calls hard and soft edges. Blender has its own terminology. I think they call it making edges sharp or not sharp. So that's all something which can be done in Blender. The way I do it is, so you may notice, for instance, if you right click on your model and go to shade smooth, it gets rid of the faceting, but I'm not sure actually if I were to export this, it would have the smooth edges. And so by the way, I'm used to using Maya's terminology for, actually, I should say hard and soft edges. So I believe if I export this, it'll still have hard edges. There is a separate step in Blender. I need to go in object mode down to this sort of triangle shape, normals, and you'll notice there's this thing called auto smooth. I just usually turn that on and jack that up to the full amount. You can see I went to 180 degrees. That'll just make everything smooth. All the edges are, soft. I keep saying smooth, but soft. Then if I want to reestablish certain edges as hard, I just go into edit mode, switch to edge selection, and then say I'll select some edges and I'll mark them as sharp. And now you can see it's got that deliberately sharp or hard edge right there. And then when I just export that, that's exactly the way it's going to look in the engine, in Unity or Unreal, for instance. Okay. So hopefully that's clear about that. Now, I actually, I don't like doing all those extra steps. So for instance, if I go back in again to my monkey, you'll notice the first thing I did was I did a auto smooth, and then I changed all the settings over there. I actually automated that a little bit since I do that so often. So you'll notice I just have this in one of these custom marking menus, auto smooth. That just did everything all in one step. I just basically just pieced together a few of the scripts and they just did it all together. Okay. Now let's take a look over at UV editing. So UV editing, I've always found, some people hate UV editing in Blender. I find it to be just fine. It serves my purposes. One thing to note is that by default, the UV editor and the 3D are not in sync. You need to turn on this little button. And what that means now is that if I say select a face or an edge over here, it'll select the corresponding one out in the 3D space, but that's not on by default. A little catch though, I can no longer select islands. So islands is also what's called UV shells, for instance, in Maya. In order to do that, you have to go back out to non-synced. This is just one of those little Blender things, which I hope will change in the future. Now you'll notice I can choose, say, entire islands and just say move them around or whatever. Okay. Talking about other add-ons that I really love. This is another one I paid for, which has saved me so much time. So actually, this is, again, I'm going to switch over to another pre-saved item. And let's see where it is. UVs. There we go. Okay, so now you can start to see this character after I more or less finished all the geometry. It's especially if you're anticipating having certain parts be symmetrical, it's a nice idea to just have one of those, one foot, one anklet, one glove, one hand, and so on, and then do the UVs for them, then mirror them over afterwards so you don't have to do that again. Okay. So basically, how do I do UVs for something like this? I'm going to try out, say, these pants right here. So I'm going to isolate that, zoom in a little bit, and a little pro tip for people. If any of you are using Blender, I mean, this can actually apply to other programs too, but if you have a gaming mouse with some sort of customizable extra buttons, I use those two things so often, either like isolating or fitting to view. I use those so often that I have my like forward and backward macro buttons on my gaming mouse set up. So you can see I'm just hitting the forward right now. It just shows and hides stuff or zooms in and out. Okay. Really fast. Okay. So how do you deal with UVs? I'm going to switch over to UV editing here. There we go. So you can see I don't have UVs yet on this thing. So unlike, so in Maya, for instance, you would have to first do some kind of projection. You don't even need to do a projection here. You can just start making your cuts of your edges and do an unwrap afterwards. Okay. So I'm going to start, for instance, by going over here. Oops, need to go to edge selection. There we go. So I selected that edge right down there, that right down there. I have my special UV editing marking menu set up. So I can go ahead and mark seam right there. You can also just right click, and this is just the mark seam, does the same thing. I've got those done. Let's see here. I'll click maybe right there. There we go. So I just got that stuff done in there. I'm going to deselect that little bit over there. May need to turn this little bit. Oh, just deselecting these little ones that I don't need selected. I'm not going to UV this whole thing because again, that would be kind of boring and so on. And so got that done. Again, mark that seam. And maybe I'll just slice it right down the middle. Mark that seam. Then I'll just select all. Unwrap. Done. So again, I find that to be pretty no nonsense myself. There is, in the unwrap, there are a couple of different methods. You may find, for instance, switching from angle-based to conformal. Depending on the thing you're unwrapping, you get a better result with one versus the other. I think in this case, it doesn't seem to make any difference. Okay. And so basically, that's what I did for this character. You know, I just went through and just piece by piece, just went through all that stuff. So let's just see if I go over there, just hide that. And so now I'm going to go over here and just we'll take a look at my UVs, and I kind of deliberately messed up all my UVs over here, so they're fully unwrapped, but you know, they're not packed yet, they're not scaled yet, so that they all have the same texel density. That's where I first I can just select all of them and just go ahead and use Blender's default packing. So Blender's default packing, you'll notice it didn't scale them. So there is also a little option for doing an average islands. There we go. Then again, a new pack. And so now you can see I've got everything with the same texel density and it's all nicely packed. Now, is there a relax function for the UVs? Yes, there is. I don't use it a ton. So for instance, if I go over here, let's see if I can find it. Up in the UV menu, there is something called minimize stretch. So I'm not sure if this is what you're talking about. And now what I'm doing is I'm just moving my scroll wheel. So I'm not sure if that's what you were asking about over there, Kareth, or not. But that may be something variable relax. Yeah. I mean, you can also use just manual options over here. So for instance, I can just grab a vert. You can see I can move this around. I can also turn on proportional fall off, which is like a soft select. And now you'll notice actually really large. Just zoom that in a little bit. So now you can see it's doing this kind of a thing, or it's just so again, I'm not sure whether that's have a Blender plugin. I don't know whether Hedis. I haven't used Hedis in years. Elliot, sorry. All right, so that's all that stuff. Now I was mentioning, I was about to say that I have another plugin which I never thought I would spend money on a plugin that only does packing. It's called UV Pack Master. but it's such a spectacular packer. I mean, you can see Blender, you can do packing, but it's not really super tight. So you'll notice here's the original Blender packing. Now I'm going to try out the same with this super duper plugin. And I'm going to do this thing called enable heuristic and advanced heuristic. And then basically I can just start packing this thing. And what's happening now, I'm not sure if you all can make out below. There we go. But you see it's now calculating. You can already see that it's just sort of coming up with different iterations, different ideas. And it's just sitting there calculating. You can also see down below how efficient it's getting. So you may notice current area right now, it's just a shade below 80%. Anytime I figure, okay, I don't want to wait anymore. It's not probably going to get much tighter packing than this. I hit escape. That's it. I just got much tighter packing than Blender's default. So that, again, huge advantage. I mean, just like I just use this thing all the time now. Just ultra tight packing. There's a lot of cool features I should mention in here, which I haven't gotten into, which allows you to start doing things like organizing your UVs a little bit better than I've done before. You know, obviously you've got things like turning on and off rotation enable and so on. So I used to spend a lot of time packing my UVs. You can see I don't really have to spend that much time anymore. So ultimately, that's how I did all my UVs for this thing. All right. What else can I show you next? So I don't know whether I want to show baking. That was called UV Packmaster. Most of my add-ons I get on Gumroad. The only one that I have that for whatever reason is not available on Gumroad is Retopo Flow, that Retopo tool. That I had to buy on Blender Market. Okay. All right. So I think I'm going to skip baking, but you can do, I did do baking from high res to low res meshes in here. Blender can do that too. I did want to jump to a little bit about texture painting. So let's see here. Let me go ahead and open that up. See what I've got next. So let me just jump over here for a second, and you can actually see a little detail I have here on the bag. It's like a little logo. There's another one up on the hat too. And I just decided Blender's painting tools, you know, I mentioned before that I use ZBrush really for sculpting. ZBrush is totally a better sculpting tool. Painting, 3D painting, to my mind, it's really no contest. Substance Painter is so far superior for texture painting to Blender that it's just not even funny at this point. There are some add-ons that are trying to bridge that gap, but again, they're not even close. It was kind of a masochistic exercise in trying to do texturing in this program, especially after having used Substance Painter. So, you know, doing this kind of a little graphic, this little detail would have been a lot faster probably in Substance Painter. But the way I tackled it here in Blender was I first just separately modeled, you can see a little version of this doohickey, this little graphic, just in 3D basically. Then I literally just created a plane behind it. You can see I've got just a couple of colors, white on black, and I just basically rendered that thing just to create a little stencil. Okay. And I just saved that image out. And again, I wasn't kidding. I really did everything in Blender for this character. I just saved that out and then used that for the sake of texturing. And so let me just open up now. Next stage, stencil B. Okay, so now you can actually start to get a sense of, I'm not going to again go through a lot of this stuff. There are no layers, for instance, by default in Blender, which is frustrating in and of itself. The painting tools are just not that sophisticated. So again, I wouldn't recommend it necessarily, but I did want to show you how I did this. So let's say I want to start painting this thing. There are a few steps to be able to start painting on this. The first thing is I need to go over to shading, and I'm going to add in a new material for this bag. There we go. And we've got a whole, by the way, node-based material editor here in Blender. If you're familiar with things like the material editor in Unreal, the like Amplify in Unity, it pretty much is the same thing. Okay. Also very similar to Substance Designer. So now I'm going to add in a new image texture. I'm going to plug that into Color. It's actually just a node or a placeholder right now. I actually have to create an actual texture itself. So I'm going to click on New. I'll just leave it at 1024 by 1024. Maybe I'll call this Bag Color. Don't need an alpha for this. Okay, so now you'll notice I've got a black color by default. I can actually see it over here. Bag color, just there's nothing in there yet. Oh, I'm guessing that was not for me. Okay, so I'm going to go over here to Texture Paint. And actually, you can already see I've loaded this this thing in there. And you can see there's I've got this thing called a texture mask. Where is it? Masking. There it is, texture mask. There we go. So I can go over here to the logo that I created. And now I can use that for the sake of painting. Now, actually, let me, before I get to that, let me just turn that off for a second. And I'm not sure why that thing keeps on wanting to show up. But basically, what I want to do is I'm going to start by just quickly filling in this entire bag with a sort of base color. So actually, I do have some preset vertex groups over here. I can just choose something, leather main, select. So again, this is a pretty tedious way of filling in an object. This is the best way I found by default. So I selected those things. Go back to Texture Paint. Just make sure that's still active. Yep. Then I'm going to turn on this thing called Paint Mask. And this is going to allow me to say fill in some kind of a color. So now you'll notice that just allows me to fill that whole thing in there. Okay. Is that working? Nope. I chose the wrong thing. Let me just quickly undo that. I need to, yeah, this is all the crazy stuff with painting in here. So tool and change this to bag color. That's what I want. There we go. Now you can see that it's filling in the correct parts with that base color. Then I can switch back over here to say paint, turn on my texture mask, grab that stencil item, and I can start positioning this with the correct hotkeys. I think it's Alt with the right mouse button. Oops. Just reposition this a little bit better. Alt with the right. Alt Shift allows me to zoom in and out, for instance. Alt Control allows me to rotate. And now you can see, I can say, start painting in this whole area with a different color. Okay. So that just hopefully gives you just one little taste of the pleasures and the horrors of doing painting in Blender. Okay. The question, did I paint him after posing? Yes, not entirely, actually. I can't remember, to be honest, Chris. I never intended to animate this character, but I think I might have started the texturing in the unposed version and then maybe finished it up in the posed version, something like that. Did I bake lighting? I'm not sure I did any lighting baking, but I was going to talk. Oh, Pat, how are we doing on time? Is it actually that I should start wrapping things up?
I'm unmuting all my things. We are at 7:54. So, I mean, how much more do you have?
Let's see here. So that was that. Oh, let me just quickly talk about rigging. This is going to be really fast, and I can. Yeah, I'm actually almost done. I can finish more or less by 8. All right. So let me just go to open. Okay. And just open up another scene. And there we go. Okay. Now, I could have rigged this by hand, but I'm not much of a technical artist. I never really enjoyed rigging. So Blender has an add-on for automatic rigging, auto rigging. And this one is actually free, and it's actually in Blender already. You just have to enable it. So if you, again, go to the preferences, add-ons, and start typing in Rigify, I already have it enabled. This is an auto rigger that just comes with Blender. Okay. And once you enable it, then you can just go over here, Shift A, Armature, and add in this thing called a human meta rig. And for any of you who have used one of these sort of auto riggers before, these are like placeholder bones that you basically need to kind of position relative to your character. Then it'll generate the actual rig later on. So I'm going to just quickly show you how I would do this. I'm going to go to edit mode. I can go over here. Let me just turn on in front so you can actually see it. I want to scale it down. So I'm going to change my pivot point to the 3D cursor. You can see that I can sort of scale that all down to start to fit it in there. I can turn on X symmetry so that I don't have to work on both sides. So, then I can start to, say, grab parts like this, and this. And I'm not going to do all that stuff. But, basically that would be what you would want to do to position all those things. I've actually got one that I've already got all lined up correctly. So you don't have to watch that painful process. So once you've got that all positioned, then I go down here, this little running person down in the settings here, and I'm going to do, let's see, is it rigify button? There we go. Rigify buttons, generate rig. So I just click on that. There we go. Then I can actually delete that original one. It's a little hard to see, but I still have that whole thing. So now I can select this one, I believe it is, select that. Maybe it's the other way around. I forget which I had selected first. No, maybe it's this way. Clearly don't do that for this very much. I forget what it is. It's one of these, either Control P or Alt P. Sorry about that. And then that'll just automatically, bind the rig to the geometry. Okay. And it comes out with a perfectly nice thing. The weights would need to be still adjusted afterwards to get it all working correctly. All right, finally, let's take a look at some rendering stuff, and we can get a little taste of Eevee, the real-time renderer. Can you customize the original? Yes, you can. You can do some customization. I think you can add in bones. I think there are also all kinds of other rigs. And some animal rigs. Yes, I'm pretty sure that it's not rigid in that regard, Brett. I think it's pretty flexible. And I've seen one or two nice YouTube tutorials in using Rigify. Yep. All right, so over here you can see I got a camera. I've got my finished posed character. The textures are actually on there. I want to switch over, for instance, to material preview. There we go. And I want to mention that over here in the settings on the right here, you can see render engines. Your Blender may be set by default to Cycles. Cycles is non-real time. It's this wonderful renderer that has really high quality. If you're doing any like animated features, your videos or whatever, this might be what you would use. But Eevee, again, more suitable for any kind of game work because it's real time. PBR, and it's great. So let's see here. I'm going to go ahead and switch over, for instance, to rendered over here. And I can do the same thing over in this view as well. This is my camera view. And let's see here. I am not familiar with Arnold. And my suspicion, Todd, is that Arnold is superior to Cycles, but I'm sure that somebody could prove me wrong. I mean, I'm no expert on non-real-time renderers. Okay. But Cycles, I've seen fantastic results out of Cycles. So you can just see now, for instance, if I go in here, I can add in, say, a nice area light. Just grab that, move it up. Start to rotate it a little bit. I can go over here to the light settings. I can increase my size if I want, increase the power a little bit. Whoa, that's pretty high. Let's try like 100. watts or something like that. And you can see you get a pretty nice result just right out of the box. And I can just F12 to render it. There's my real-time renderer. A little large. There we go. Yeah, great results. I mean, that you can see that's there is some image-based lighting in there, and then just a single area light. Pretty nice for real-time render. So that is what I had to show today. I hope that was helpful to people, but I am open to questions.
Woo! Getting some
Arnold has a
praise.
better toon shader. Pretty equivalent. Okay, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. Let's see. Good to hear, Kreth. Yeah, I mean, I'm seeing lots of like I'm seeing some people showing off. There's a great for those of you who haven't seen. There's this guy. He's got a great nickname, Mr. Dodo Bird. Ian Hubert, I believe is his real name, and he does these like 1 minute silly tutorials that are actually fantastic tutorials of stuff in Blender. And he's done some nice. I believe it's him who's done some nice side by sides of a cycles render versus an EV render, and in some cases, it's very hard to see the difference. Let's see, can you say anything about how Blender's animation tools? All right, so I am not an, I have done some animating, and in both programs, both Maya and Blender. I would say that kind of like, I would say it's probably better in Maya. Perfectly adequate, especially, if you're asking my opinion about like if you were to start as an independent contractor, or if you're starting, say, an indie studio, I would just say Blender every day for that kind of work. I think it's really going to have 95 to 99% of the animation capabilities of Maya. So VFX and simulations, I've seen great stuff in it, Elliot, but I'm not sure. Are you thinking about, for instance, for flip books and stuff for real time effects, or just because? Oh yeah, somebody mentioned the denoiser. I did start using the denoiser for a non real time project, which came out really nice. Oh, nice to hear about the rigid bodies, Jamal. Yeah, hopefully that answered that question about animation. I'm not really an expert, but I would guess that it would be perfectly suitable. I mean, I mean, you can see the proof is in the pudding. There's wonderful character animation that's been done in Blender. I don't have a ton of experience with that, but it sounds like Jamal does. Yeah, I think there've been some new fluid developments, hasn't there, for in Blender that look quite nice.
Any other questions from the group? Questions within the group.
Questions. Yeah, we got for anybody who wants us to narrate. It looks like Todd's asking Jamal about is Blender your primary effects tool? And again, just to be clear, the real time, the effects work in Blender wouldn't be real time.
Well,
nice. Is that it?
I'll go ahead and turn myself back on here.
Okay, yeah, I'm going to stop sharing actually.
Sweet. Everyone else seems to be good. Seems like a nice time to wrap things up.
Yep, my pleasure. I'm glad. Thank you everybody for showing up.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for doing this, Ezra.
Yeah, my pleasure. I hope it was helpful.
There's my little. Hold on, let me see if I can find this thing really fast. Ah, here we go. Just so we can get a little bit of real time cheers. Yeah! That's all of us from afar clapping for you. Cool. Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
I think Last time we hung out on Zoom, I wasn't sure if I was going to do this or not, and we shared it in the Mass Game Devs channel just so we wouldn't be broadcasting live to everybody on Twitch. So I might just send out the invite there. If anyone is in the Boston Game Devs channel, I'm also there, and happy to share the link as well. So feel free to reach out, PM me. My name's Pat. Once again, Pat King, and I think let me see, might be Face of Pat or just Pat in the Boston Game Devs channel. But I'll post the Zoom link. Reach out if you want. Ezra, if you don't mind hanging out, maybe we can actually
Yeah.
get real face-to-face action with some
Yeah.
people too. So thanks again. I'm going to end the stream, but really, really appreciate this. This was fantabulous. So
Wonderful.
all right,
Take
cool.
care, everybody. Maybe we'll
Yeah.
see some people on Zoom.
Thanks, everyone. Bye. All right.
All right. Let me just